and also served as the chairperson in the province of Gauteng, the chairperson of SASCO in the Gauteng province. He's a former NYDA board member, National Youth Development Agency, and is currently serving as a management consultant. Immediately after him, we'll go to Mogodo, Comrade Precious Banda, who currently is the convener of the ANC Women's League Young Women's Desk. She also serves as a member of the National Committee of Amakomonisi, the Youth Young Communist League of South Africa, YCLSA, and is also the ANC Youth League, part of the ANC Youth League, NYTD. So, Comrade Dumiso, I'm going to hand over to you immediately, my leader, if you could address us. The hope is that yourself, Comrade Dumiso, will take about 20 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes. We'll give Comrade Precious equal time, and then we'll give them another 15 to 20 minutes to Comrade Nyami. Over to Comrade Dumiso.
Thank you very
much. Sipo, can we unmute?
Yes, thank you very much, Comrade JP. Am I audible?
Yes, very audible. Yes,
no, thank you very much, Comrade JP. I would like to thank the leadership of the OR Tambo School of Leadership for subpoenaing me to come appear in front of members and supporters of the ANC, alongside an activist I've shared trenches with since we met in the historic NGC of SASCO in 2010, Comrade Precious Banda, and the former deputy president of both SAICO and the Youth League, Comrade Nyambi.
Yes,
comrades, we are called today to come and discuss, exchange ideas, Comrade JP, on the important topic of the type of young people which are required to drive or to be agents of change towards the society envisaged by the Freedom Charter or towards the National Democratic Society. Now, Comrade JP and members and supporters of the ANC, my best description of the society which was envisaged by the Freedom Charter was properly defined by President Thabo Mbeki in 1978 when he wrote his seminal document, The Historical Injustices. In that piece, Comrade Thabo makes a compelling argument that the society which is envisaged by the Freedom Charter is the society which will reposition Africans in particular and blacks in general into being producers of wealth, but this time not producing this wealth for the enjoyment of a few or the elite, but producing this wealth for our own benefit and for to be appropriated by the producers. The aim of this production shall be the satisfaction at an increasing level of the material and spiritual needs of the people. We shall so order the rest of society and social activity in education and culture, in the legal sphere, on the military question, along this side of logic. That's what Comrade Thabo says when he speaks about the Freedom Charter or the society envisaged by the Charter. Now, Comrade JP, this discussion of today is important to me for three reasons. The first reason is that we're going to be discussing the role young people must play towards resolving the three interrelated contradictions of class, race, and gender, which we assume that in a national democratic society, they will not exist. And it is common cause that in South Africa today, the victims of the system are young people. So those who are still affected by the legacy of a system which discriminated alongside class, race, and gender are the youth. The second reason, Comrade JP and members of the ANC, is that the historically oppressed majority of South Africans, at this moment, in particular, now that we're going through COVID-19, are starting to ask the important question: will we ever arrive in the society envisaged by the Freedom Charter? Will we ever arrive in this land of milk and honey, which comrades said promised us in 1955? And majority of these who are asking this question are young people. When we meet them in the streets, when we meet them in seminars, they speak to us and say, what is the meaning of freedom if it means anything? The third thing why this thing is in this today's discussion is important to me, Comrade JP, is that we are having this discussion in June. So in June, it is now a ritual in South Africa that we celebrate or we honor the heroic class of 1976 for their heroic deeds. But most importantly, we also celebrate the anniversary of the Freedom Charter. Now, those who are conversant with the history of the organization would know very well the role young people played in crafting the Freedom Charter and in making sure that the Congress of the People in Kliptown was a success. One of those who played a very critical role was Comrade Ben Turok, who was turning 28 exactly on the day in which the Freedom Charter was adopted. It is argued that the most progressive clause, in my view, of the Freedom Charter, which speaks about transferring the wealth to the ownership of the people as a whole, was crafted by Comrade Ben Turok. We know the role Comrade Bernstein played, Rusty Bernstein, who was 35 that year, and Comrade Nyambi, most importantly, that gathering which adopted the Freedom Charter in Kliptown was presided over by Dr. Wilson Konko, who was about 35, 36 at that time. So this shows that young people have always been at the center of the struggle. But lastly, and which I believe should be the point of departure for today as we discuss the role of young people, is the fact that we are having this discussion at a time when the liberation movement or the broader mass democratic movement is characterized by high levels of generational tensions because of the ANC's failure to manage succession or transition properly. And there is also a serious call from young people which speaks about young people taking over. And this to me is important because as a proponent of that call, we as young people, I feel we have not grounded that call in proper revolutionary theory. And as a result, it has been problematized. So today, I think it is important that we start there, comrades. I think it is important that because it must be clearly understood that not all young people have the characteristics and the spirits to drive the Freedom Charter. This dangerous and at times self-defeating mantra ignores the reality that young people are not homogeneous, they have different backgrounds, they have different experiences, and they have different class aspirations. This mantra, which is about young people taking over at all costs, compels us to assume that all young people are inherently progressive and all people are counter-revolutionary. And this is very far from the truth. If this mantra was true, you will not have young people in the AfriForum, you will not have young people in the Inkatha Freedom Party, you will not have young people in the Freedom Front, which are counter-revolutionary organizations. You will not have young people in our own liberation movement, which were caught or found out to be askaris in the struggle for liberation. This mantra, which says young people are inherently progressive and young people must take over, blinds us to the reality that there are young people who are embedded in the status quo and do not want to see any changes and have instead chosen to be inspired by musician and actor 50 Cent when he says die rich or die trying. This mantra obstructs us from seeing sexist young people, from seeing corrupt young people, from seeing young chauvinists, from seeing backward young people who are entrenched in traditional authorities, and young people who see organs of people's power like the Youth League, the YCL, and SASCO, and its instruments of upward class mobility. Now, comrades, I thought it is important that I give this characteristic of young people because young people are not homogeneous. Young people do not have the same aspirations and wishes. But it is important again that I say, I do not mention these pitfalls to undermine the legitimate call of making our organizations younger and other sides of power younger. The purpose of mentioning these pitfalls, it is to caution genuine young revolutionaries and those who genuinely believe in the call that the ANC and sides of power must be younger to reflect today's society such that we ground it in theory. Those of you who are familiar with the 2016 deployment of councillors would know that the Youth League, the YCL, insisted on a sizable number of councillors, of young councillors to be deployed into councils. But we have not seen the desired change in how councils conduct their business. As a result, young people are starting to question what is the use of deploying other young people. In fact, because we're not scrutinizing the type of young people who were deploying, other young people are saying it explicitly that this call for 40% or 20% youth representation was a scam for the leadership of the Youth League to position themselves, to empower themselves and those close to them. So if we are not careful and we do not go back to the drawing board and ground this call in sound revolutionary theory, we are going to have serious problems and it will soon lose legitimacy. I mentioned these pitfalls in our perspective because our loose use of the word youth and failure to describe the caliber of young people or the characteristics and spirit these young people who are supposed to be drivers of change should have, has opened this noble call of making leadership or echelons of power younger to opportunists amongst young people, and at worst to silly and naughty old people in the ANC who have started the practice of planting and imposing young people in structures of the ANC and the ANC Youth League to advance their backwards ideas and be conveyor belts of their backwardness. So comrades, at the center of this extract is to say, in as much as we want young people to take over, it is not all young people that can take over. It is not all young people that have the spirit. It is not all young people that have the capability. It is not all young people that have the revolutionary morality to take over. So we must be very careful as we discuss the type of people that must lead our organization and drive the implementation of the Freedom Charter. Comrade JP, I want to propose, and my thesis that I'm presenting to you today is that the type of young people which must be drivers or agents of change towards the society envisaged by the Freedom Charter are young revolutionaries who believe in the power and unity of organized young revolutionaries. Those who are organized to rebel against the status quo because of their class position or the experiences they have as a result of the system. Those who have organized themselves from a class of its own to a class for its own. That is extremely important because not all young people are conscious of the oppression which they suffer on a daily basis. They must be united by intolerance towards the current system which has condemned young people into being the downtrodden, the super exploited, the criminals, the sex workers, the drug addicts, and a symbol of all failures of the ANC. They must not be united in a queue for crumbs that which falls on the table of those who have power. They must not be united on the gravesite of the ANC. They must not be united along allowing wrong things to slide because they are done by those whom they agree with. The drivers of the Freedom Charter cannot be a youth who is inspired by old comrades which represent the lowest level of revolutionary morality. A youth who is fighting to change the leadership of the ANC because they feel it is their turn to eat. A youth who is willing to cover up corruption and or ignore it as long as it benefits them. A youth who refuses to become conversant with the theory and history of our revolution. The youth which is capable or required to drive the Freedom Charter forward, to take us to the promised land which our people were promised in 1955, was properly described by the former president of the ANC Youth League, in Comrade Anton Lembede, when he wrote for Inkundla Yabantu in 1945. Comrade Anthony says, open quote, "We are not called to peace, comfort, and enjoyment, but hard work, struggle and sweat. We need young men and women of high moral stamina and integrity, of courage and vision. In short, we need warriors. So the point that Comrade Lembete makes here is to caution the leadership of the ANC and of the League at that point in time, that it is not all young people that will help us take the struggle forward. Their role in the struggle was properly put by the ANC in 1985 when preparing for the Kwabe Consultative Conference, where they said no revolution can be victorious without the effective organization, mobilization of youth into political action. So comrades, this shows that young people are important to take the struggle forward. But it is not all types of young people. It is young people that have the correct revolutionary morality, the correct fighting spirit, and the correct characteristics. This point, comrades, of a youth and its importance in the struggle was affirmed by Lenin when he was speaking to Larry, when responding to Larry in 1906, when the Mensheviks accused the Bolsheviks as a party of inexperienced young people. Comrade Lenin wrote, and one of the things he says that he borrowed from Engels and said we're a party of the youth. So to me, comrades, this is very important, and that is why we need to discuss these things. So I want to make a point towards the end that says, we'll not be honest if we were to discuss the problems confronting young people of today or their social agency, if we want to discuss them outside of the broader problems confronting the ANC and society in general. If we were to do that, we'll be falling trap of victims of the intellectual dishonesty of the intellectuals of the ruling class, which like to mask social problems by making them problems of young people, like saying there is youth unemployment, creating an impression that the moment you cease to be young, you get a job immediately. So we need to identify. And one of the things which is I find extremely problematic is that since the early 90s, there has emerged a very corrosive and defective value system in South Africa. Comrade Thabo Mbeki puts this very well in 2006 when he presents the Nelson Mandela Lecture. And he says that we are unfortunately in an era where people are starting to define freedom by personal acquisitions like the car they drive, the house they live in, the suburbs they stay in, and all those things. And that has eroded the value system of selflessness and serving without expecting any material gains. The second problem, Comrade JP, will be dishonest if we were to not admit that there was a leadership decline in the ANC, and the decline has been proceeding uninterrupted from since we assumed political power. And this leadership decline has obstructed our vision, our leadership's vision to think about tomorrow and the future. And I will make two examples. The first one is that in 1985, when we went to the Kabwe Consultative Conference, the ANC had a whole document titled The Role of the Youth in Society, the ANC and the Struggle. In 2017, when we went to Nazareth, the strategy and tactics only makes mention of young people in paragraph 47, just one paragraph. And in 1985, there was a whole 6-page document. When the leadership of Tambo and that NEC was very visionary and believed in building a future for tomorrow. That is why the comrades who were born in 1942, which amongst them is Comrade Krizan, who should be celebrating his birthday today, Comrade Thabo Mbeki, were co-opted into the National Executive Committee of the ANC at age 33. They were not elected. It was the leadership deliberately preparing for a better tomorrow. Comrade JZ was co-opted 2 years later at the age of 35. That was the leadership. So those things no longer happen. In fact, today, co-options are done to balance factional interest or reward blind loyalists who could not be elected in conference. Comrade JP, towards the end, I also want to argue that one of the things that happened is that our movement, as part of the problems, is how our movement continues to treat dissent, or how our movement deals with people who are critical voices, especially post assuming political leadership of the country. And this problem is not unique to the ANC. We all know what happened to the ANC Youth League in 2013, which at most it is my considered view that it was a blunder to disband them. And secondly, they were disbanded for having a critical view against those in power. As I said, this is not only unique to the ANC. It happened in Zambia, how the UNIP of Comrade Kenneth Kaunda lost power. It's when they started fighting the Progressive Trade Union ZACTU, and Chiluba had to contest them in 1991. It happened in Zimbabwe with Morgan Tsvangirai and Mugabe. It happened here in South Africa, even if it didn't take a similar shape. We saw NUMSA going out and many other progressive NGOs which we should be fighting for. I want to conclude, Comrade JP, I think my 20 minutes finishes now, by saying that the Youth League and the Progressive Youth Alliance in general can only be a factory that produces the correct caliber of young people if we go back to become the organization which was described by the 1944 Manifesto of the Youth League. The manifesto says, open quote, "The Congress Youth League must be the brain trust and power station of the spirit of African nationalism, the spirit of African self-determination, the spirit that is discernible in the thinking of our youth. Most importantly, it must be an organization where young African men and women will meet and exchange ideas in an atmosphere pervaded by a common hatred for oppression." If we do not build that organization, we are not going to be a factory that produces young people with the correct spirit, the correct characteristic to drive forward the Freedom Charter. We must intensify political education as the school is attempting to do. We must also make sure that these young people are at the center of discussions about the future of this country, because they are the engineers of South Africa of tomorrow. But most importantly, these young people must break the chains and go back to the grassroots methods of struggling of the ANC and forging alliances with progressive NGOs, with progressive sectors of society. This will help these young people for them to challenge the status quo and successively challenge the neoliberal discourse that is happening in the country. It must be these young people with the correct spirit of leading the Freedom Charter who must help us advance discussions or help us challenge neoliberalism when it opposes progressive state intervention like quantitative easing, like the deployment of Africans and women to run strategic sectors of the economy, like the transition from high carbon emitting activities to a green economy, and our battle cry, expropriation of land without compensation. If we do not do this correctly, comrades, we are not going to produce the correct young people or young people with the correct characteristics to advance the Freedom Charter. Lastly, Chair, I think there is a scientific relationship between how well the economy is doing at that time and the caliber of comrades who are going to produce. So if we do not resolve the crisis of the economy and implement the Freedom Charter where it says we need to transfer the wealth of the country to the ownership of the people as a whole, the ANC and political activism will be reduced to an economic sector where even thugs and people who have no resonance with the values, traditions, and principles of the ANC will come and join the ANC such that they lay their hands on the leadership of the ANC, then on state power, and lastly on the public purse, and use it to thieve amongst themselves and empower themselves. Thank you very much, Comrade JP. I hope I did not take long.
Comrade Dumiso, you are certainly on time, leader. Thank you very much. Certainly clear that you put a bit of effort in preparing for today, so we really appreciate that highly. Comrade Precious, let's just go immediately to you. Comrades, over to Comrade Precious Banda. As I've said earlier, she is convener of the ANC Women's League Young Women's Desk, serves on the National Committee. She's a member of the YCLSA National Committee and also serves on the Youth League's NYTT. Comment, Precious?
Thank you so much, Program Director, Comrade JP. And let me start by sending my greetings to the leadership of the OR Tambo School of Leadership, to all comrades, to our respondents and all comrades that are here with us today. Chair, I would like my presentation to be shared. Yes.
Okay,
But
okay,
as
cool.
and when we are doing the logistics of sharing, I'll start speaking so that we don't waste time.
Okay, I think
Chair,
Sipokazi is putting it up now, Comrade Precious. Yes, it's
thank
on.
you. Thank you so much, Chair.
I hope you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay, good. So please
Thank
just direct it. If you wanted to go down, just tell her to move.
Okay, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, I want to start by first speaking about the preparation and build up towards the Congress of the People. And I deliberately want to speak about the preparation towards the Congress of the People because I want to emphasize and bring to the attention of everyone the role that young people of that time played. That firstly, the intention of the Congress of the People was to accommodate the views of as many people as possible, that the movement sent volunteers on the ground to go and find out what it is that the people wanted to be incorporated as part of the Freedom Charter. And when that was happening, you also had women activists doing the same, Comrade Chair. And the women activists went to the ground, and there were young women of the time, Sophie de Bruyn being one of them. They went to the ground to find out what it is that women were saying that the Freedom Charter must include. And they came up with a document that they called What the Women Demand. It had a lot of demands, and if you look at it today, most of those demands that women demanded have not yet been achieved. Some form part of the Freedom Charter, the demands of the Freedom Charter, but have not yet been achieved today. Part of them was fully paid maternity leave, equal responsibility on the nursing of children, play areas for children so that they enhance culture, social cohesion and development in all areas, including in rural areas and so on. So it was, in fact, an activity of the youth, the Congress of the People. And that's why more than 50,000 volunteers went all out to collect the views of the people. So the movement today must always remember that as long as we continue to champion the Freedom Charter, we must always represent the aspirations of the people, because that was the spirit of the Freedom Charter. I go to my second point of the adoption of the Freedom Charter at the Congress of the People. And the adoption of the Freedom Charter itself is not like, you know, some decorated Bible that we must continue to rhetoric on and we have a Freedom Charter, we have a Freedom Charter and so on. But these were organic demands that spoke to the lived and daily experiences of the people that must be struggled for. So the demands of the Freedom Charter are not there for their own sake. They are there to speak to the lived experience and the quality of life of the people. So we must continue to fight for the demands of the people and reduce the talking, because over time, from the adoption to today, what has been happening, especially post-democracy, has been a lot of talkism, a lot of talk and very little action by ourselves as the movement. So we need to get to a point where we understand that the people are impatient and there's need for urgency in addressing the issues that people spoke about in that Congress of the People. But also the other thing that happens is that we don't want to reach a point where we want to say the demands of the Freedom Charter are no longer relevant because they were adopted a long time ago, and in the long run, society has evolved and has given birth to new challenges that we take very key resolutions, we take very key aspirations of people and we do not deliver on them until society evolves to a time that now we have new challenges that will need us to come back again and reflect and say, what is it that we need to give the people? So we need to really look at and not be comfortable with not achieving, we don't need to be comfortable with not achieving the demands that are in the Freedom Charter. So I've already spoken about how young people were in the forefront and how the Freedom Charter is built on democracy and the will of the people. Democracy today, including in the organization, you know, is being evaded. We need to have an honest discussion on how the organizational processes in the movement, because the movement mirrors society, and the movement that accepts that is the leader of society must lead by example, and in all its cultures and practices must shape society in such a way that we move into the direction that we want to take the country into. Now, if we have a movement that sells and buys democratic processes, if we commodify democratic processes like today, and we normalize it that after congresses, we don't want to have an honest conversation. We'll be going to the next Congress after NASREC, just in 2 years. But since NASREC to today, apart from factional sloganeering, we've not had an honest conversation about the commodification of organizational processes. NASREC was bought. Processes to electing leadership were flawed in such a way that it was through the eye of campaign budget, that systematically that excluded the poor from participating. And it's a dangerous culture that we need to address, because if we don't, in the future conferences, it gets entrenched in such a way that if you are poor, you've got quality leadership to offer to the people, you've got quality ideas and all that it takes to lead us to where we want to go as the movement. If you are poor, you'll not be able to lead. It will be an exercise of the rich or those that are endorsed by the rich. We need this honest conversation as a movement, but more, we need an apology from our current leaders for buying our organization, for evading democratic processes, for stealing, because buying stole the voice and the will of the people. It's against the Freedom Charter. Now, the kind of integrity of leadership that we want is that is produced by flawed processes of money. It has to be condemned, and the conversation has to be held. An honest conversation, not factional sloganeering. That needs to stop this, or else the organization is going to go to the highest bidder. You have also a judgment that has just been passed by the Constitutional Court now about independence. So if you don't strengthen democratic processes where the outcomes of those of congresses and processes that elect leadership are solely based on what the people are saying, you are going to have a situation where you have disgruntled people. So we can't have disgruntled membership as a movement. We can't have the poor feeling they are left out of processes because they cannot afford to buy their way into leadership. So I just want to say it's part of the most immediate issues that we need to talk about and that we need to address, and a reflection by our leaders today that makes them to know and to understand that what they did to the movement by commodifying processes is really wrong, and they must be very sorry for that so that we can move forward. So all forms of injustices, the Freedom Charter was built on fighting all forms of injustices and oppression. Now, all these forms of injustices and oppression today must be fought with the same vigor. And when we say that, we speak about the most marginalized in society, the social reproduction crisis. COVID has exposed that also. We need to address all that, and that the poor and the working class must be prioritized in whatever that we do, and that we need to change their social positioning in society, and we need to look into deliberate, policies, deliberate resolutions that we take to change the lives of the most marginalized among us. So I just want to say the Freedom Charter is still very valid, and that what makes it even more valid is for us to see the need to implement it, beyond just rhetoricing on it all the time. I also want, Chair, to speak about, Chair, I'm failing to move, okay, I see it. Okay, thank you, Chair. The implementation.
You won't be able to move yourself. Someone, Comrade Sipokas is managing it for you, so you must just tell her every time when you want to move.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the implementation, I'm on point 3, where I speak about the implementation of the Freedom Charter towards a better society, and that the Freedom Charter, if we take it for what it is, together with the strategies and tactics that the movement has adopted, guarantees us a society where we are all equal, a society without racism, a society without patriarchy and gender inequality, a society where capitalism does not thrive on the poor, where exploitation is confronted in all forms. So we need to remember that these equalities that we want are urgent. Our people can't continue, the people are tired. And that's why you have, I'll come to another point I want to speak about, a lot of impatient young people that organize themselves differently into social movements. Why do we think that recently, whatever fundamental changes or fundamental issues that come into play are brought about by social movements? Why do you think that we had young people that organized themselves in confronting, racism and called for roads to fall? Why do you think we had young people that also belong to our organizations, but when they wanted to fight for fees must fall, they organized themselves as just fees must fall activists, feeling burdened by the bureaucracy of the organization? Young people were burdened by they felt like our movement, the organization, the Progressive Youth Alliance, ties them up in such a way that it reduces their fighting capacity in calling for fees to fall. It's a reflection that we want to make, that the bureaucracy of the organization that we have, and also the continuous shoring has made young people sometimes to just organize themselves into social movement. But we have an advantage on our side. The advantage on our side is that we are built on organization, that we have something that these social movements don't have, the capacity to sustain organization. And while they bask in their newness, we are able to sustain organization. But in sustaining and organizing ourselves in a way that we do as organization, we need to ensure that we reposition ourselves to capture the imagination of all of them and to act with impatience in addressing their issues. We need to renew ourselves so that we appeal to the current challenges that young people are faced with, because the challenges of young people of then are not too similar with my challenges today. The young people then that were fighting and adopting the Freedom Charter did not see the need for data. It was not something that they could prioritize. Today, as a young person, I want data to fall. Today, as a young person, I'm confronted with the fourth industrial revolution. Today, as a young person, I'm here in a virtual platform where there's a young person like me somewhere who has no connectivity, a young person who cannot afford data. My challenges today are contemporary to my times, and the movement should be able to renew itself in such a way that it responds to that and it becomes appealing to young people of the time. Also, the other thing that we must not lose as we build a diverse society, as we build this united, diverse society that carries everyone into the NDR, into advancing the NDR, is that we need also sometimes to look at the insecurities of the non-charterists, those that left the Congress movement to go and form some narrow parties on Pan-Africanism. Their insecurities were that Blacks would lose their own, struggle as those that were marginalized, because they would be diluted by all these other races and put them at the back foot of the struggle. Now, as and when we are fighting for the advancement of the national democratic revolution, addressing the question of class, race, and gender, we also need to look at the status of the majority who remain poor, who remain dispossessed, who remain today unemployed, who remain living in poverty and below the poverty line. Majority of these are Black, and majority of them are in fact women. And this again has given birth to some spring. There is some rising of some Pan-Africanists that attempts to discredit the movement. This Pan-Africanism today, attempting to discredit the movement, thrives on wanting to put a claim that the movement has not prioritized the working class, who are mostly Black and women, and the movement leaves these people behind. As and when we are building the society that we think we are building, we are leaving Black people and women behind. So we need to address this, and that our movement is not at all leaving behind Black people, but our movement in fact fights for the total liberation of all, including all Blacks. And if we address this, we are going to respond to this rise of Pan-Africanism that is there today in the circles. It's very fashionable for young people in the space to be Pan-African, to be pro-Black, to be all these things that want to assert Blackness. It's as a result of the feeling of insufficiency on how the movement addresses issues that involve working class majority who are Black in our society. So I just want to say the Freedom Charter, when you look at it, in fact, COVID-19 has exposed us a lot. The demands of the Freedom Charter, speak to the challenges today that are there during COVID. When you speak, you look at the demands of the Freedom Charter. Had some of them been attained by now, we wouldn't have the crisis that we have of the poor today. We can't continue to sustain a society where we give people food parcels instead of empowering them so that they're able to produce for themselves. That's what the Freedom Charter was speaking about. The Freedom Charter spoke about land. It spoke about land into the hands of those who work it, but those who work it are staying in areas where they are highly and densely populated. They stay in informal settlements where it's a family of 10 into one room, and you come and you say they should be physical distance. The working class today are in informal settlements there, where it is tough and they're sharing communal taps, they don't have water. Things that the Freedom Charter said we must give to our people. That today, because there is COVID-19, that's when we think we have budget and we provide a budget to bring these tanks of water into those areas. Why didn't we see the urgency of mobilizing resources to put running water in all these places as the Freedom Charter spoke? Why didn't we see the urgency to put proper housing. Yes, RDP is there, but informal settlement is growing because RDP is not moving at the rate that responds to the people. Development of rural areas is not taking place. Everyone is migrating to the city to become migrant labor, and they stay in informal settlements that are not safe, that don't have sanitation. Issues that the Freedom Charter said we must address then. Now COVID-19 comes and it exposes us today. So I just want to say the role of young people in building a society invested in the Freedom Charter is not to be impatient with the status quo and to take responsibility for the present and the future. The thing of old people buying us alcohol so that we sing their names, the thing of old people giving us patronage so that we just become defenders, a hands-off brigade, young people of hands-off, always at the forefront of depending people that have lived their lives, people that have exhausted their lives. Today, they mess with our movement, they mess with our present, they mess with our future, and they buy us in the process with piecemeal gifts of alcohol, patronage of e-wallets, palace politics, and all those things. Young people must be impatient with such things and must gain back their voice, take back their voice, and take responsibility. In many platforms, we have spoken about how we condemn old people, dispensing patronage, how we condemn factionalism, institutionalized factionalism in the movement. But for how long do we condemn? And when do we take responsibility as young people to say we don't want this and will not be part of this? If we stand up and take ourselves too serious and say we don't agree with what elders do in killing our movement, then what is going to happen is that they'll have no one to patronize. They'll have no one to pay so that they sing hands off. They'll have no one ready to defend them every time they mess up. They'll see that we take our future serious and we are ready to build the kind of future that we want. Please move it a bit up.
Okay, Comrade Precious, I also don't want to disrupt your mojo, but we are on about 20 minutes now. I wonder if I can give at least another 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm concluding.
Okay, thank you.
I'm concluding. So I'm speaking about building youth fronts with other young people on common struggles, uniting young people and establishing sufficient consensus on issues confronting us, decommodify the movement and restore democracy, defend organization while renewing it, repositioning it, reimagining, reviving and rebuilding, denounce palace politics, factionalism and patronage, have servant leadership. Young people of strength and courage to attend the demands of the Freedom Charter are needed today. And behind this, I've just put together with all the demands of the Freedom Charter and what, I think on each and every demand, Chair, we need to do. For example, on education, the decolonization of education is very important. The democratization of education is also very important. Nationalization of all key sides of the economy is also needed now or never for young people. Land must be returned to the rightful owners. So I just go on and on each and every of the demands of the Freedom Charter, putting what I think we need to address, the need for, recognition of marginalized communities like the LGBTQIA+ community and other marginalized communities that must be recognized as we fight all forms of injustice, and embracing intersectionality as we fight for total liberation. So Black lives must matter, women's lives must matter. Let's fight patriarchy and inequality. Let's pay women in sports and so on. So I think you can just share the presentation to comrades so that they see what we are proposing, that it be done in attaining the Freedom Charter demands for us and for our future as young people of today, Chair. Thank you so much. And I would just like to say in this Youth Month that we have as young people in the Pride Month, it's also Pride Month. When we move forward, we need to own our future and assert ourselves and be attractive to young people of all forms out there, that in their own newness, as they organize themselves in whichever way, we must be able to capture them and to bring them to be part of a battle of ideas, of the correct politics of the movement. Thank you, Chair. Chair, must I continue? Comrades, since the chair is not there, I'm going to continue so that we don't just have a moment of silence. Yeah, so comrades, the other thing, I think Comrade Dumiso spoke extensively on it, the ostentatiousness that is there and the negative display of wealth by young people, and to create an impression like, for you to make it, you have to take the easy way out, and it's as easy as it is portrayed. When in fact, what should be encouraged is hard work. Let's encourage hard work among young people, encourage education among young people, encourage discussions without being intolerant with each other. Chair, are you back?
Yeah, I'm. My computer's giving me trouble, comrade.
It's
but I
fine.
managed
Until
to
you fix your
get...
computer, I can continue.
No. I've sorted out. I'm on the phone now, so if you can hear me now, it means I'm back.
Okay, yes. Okay, thank you then, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Comrade Precious. And I mean, I've had the benefit compared to everybody else, comrades, to see Comrade Precious's presentation. So we will share it. Everything else that's here will be kept on Facebook, and will also circulate via email the presentations that we've received from both Comrade Precious and Comrade Dumi. If you can talk to Comrade Sipokazi, just to make sure that you are on our receiving list. Now we're going to go over to Comrade Nyami. Comrade Nyami has been in politics since the age of 16. So you can imagine if I was to try to tell you his story, we're going to finish tomorrow, if not next week, just going through all of the things that he's been through up to this point. But safe to say for today, he was a member of the South African Student Movement, SASM, and also was in COSAS, an organizer from those many, many years ago. He's a former deputy president of the South African Youth Congress, as well as the ANC Youth League. I think that point, in fact, has been mentioned earlier. Comrade Nyami is currently serving our organization in Parliament as a member of Parliament, where he's been deployed since 1994, and at some point also served as the chief whip, his former chief whip there. I mean, he served in a number of committees in Parliament, and I'm not going to go through each one of them. Comrade Nyami, I'm going to hand over to you. I mean, as you've heard yourself, I think the inputs that Comrade Dumiso and Precious gave us, giving us a sense of thinking from young people, and Comrade Dumiso in the main saying that, we need to have a conversation around this issue of what young people must become, looking at the content of these young people and their understanding of how the world works. And Comrade Precious in particular really raising attention to the question of structure and processes in the ANC, and say that in the movement overall, in fact, in a mass democratic movement, and saying that there's a need to look at this and making sure that they become responsive and also responsive to our youth. So in that context, Comrade Nyami, we're at your mercy for the next 20 minutes. Comrade Nyami, you can unmute yourself. You have to do that. Sipokazi, you're going to have to assist us here a little bit quickly. Comrade Nyami, let's just try to get you unmuted. Sipokazi?
Okay.
Yeah, there we
Can
go.
you hear me, Chair?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Loud and clear.
Now, on reflection on what the comrades have done, they've done a very good job on analyzing and reflecting on the situation. But the key point that we are looking at this particular moment is the Freedom Charter and what lessons should have been drawn and what young people themselves should have been able to take out as lesson. Now, one thing that is very impressive, you see, we shouldn't shrink as young people from our responsibility because we are revolutionaries. We have got a responsibility to destroy capitalism. We've got a responsibility to destroy imperialism. We've got a responsibility to destroy colonialism itself. And we've got a responsibility to destroy patriarchy. Now, within that, that's a broader framework of how you look at society. And it means how we move forward, it's that particular assessment and that contribution that says to us, how far have we gone whilst we look at the policies of the Freedom Charter? How far have we been able to assess the destruction of capitalism? How far have we been able to destruct or to destroy imperialism? How much work have we done against colonialism? And how much work have we done against feudalism? That is the framework of how the Freedom Charter should be assessed, so that we don't bog down and go down to levels of talking about individuals, but we talk about the African National Congress within this dialectical material. What role has it played? Have young people been able to look into that environment and see if ever there are changes? Now, I'll explain to you, as the chair said, when we joined SASIM under the Black Consciousness Movement, it was about Black men be on your own, and you have got nothing to lose than your change, which meant that we were to break the chains of oppressions. But when we debated that, is that the future we want? What type of future we're looking for? That's how we got to put together the Congress of South African Students. Because we saw that there's no society that could be seen outside the framework of capitalism. Because capitalism is about class contradictions. And for us to look at those policies that the Freedom Charter have put forward, we have to look into, have they been able to resolve the class contradictions? No, they haven't been able. So that the symptoms that you keep on seeing of what people wear and what people are doing or what people see, young people are looking at, must be seen as symptoms. But the bigger picture is capitalism, even during this pandemic, has been able to revive itself and being able to resolve it, to consolidate its position. And that's what we need to be able to ask young people. And that's how you must be able to look at the Freedom Charter. Because if the Freedom Charter says the people shall govern, we should be asking ourselves at this particular moment, even when we have been able to be involved in the state, have we been able to give that right to the people to govern? Yes, we've been able. I mean, I've been in Parliament. I know how much we've tried to use much legislation to be able to reach out and be able to meet the people shall govern. Have we been able to find an economic policy that should be able to meet, because we're the most inequal society under capitalism? And we have not been able to do that work properly. So it means that an assessment between ourselves and young people at this current time is, what is it that we have been able to do to equalize the economy? What contribution should we be able to draw from you to guide us? Because within our own period during the 80s, I said yesterday to the gallant fighters that were together during 1980, that one of the things that with us, the unbanning of the ANC is not what de Klerk has done for us. There's no favor. We unbanned the African National Congress the day we formed the Congress of South African Students. Because we were clear in our mindset when we put together Congress of South African Students that as a student, you can't go to school without understanding the material conditions of where you come from. So it meant that students, before you become a student, highly learner, you must understand your material condition. And any Marxist will tell you, without understanding the material conditions of where you come from, you are doomed as a revolutionary. It means that your performance will go very low. And this is what the assessment I wanted to do and want to look into that. Our comrades realizing that it's important for us that we reflect on the material conditions that we have been confronted with since 1994 and what major changes have we been able to do ideologically. Have we been able to re-entrench capitalism, or have we reformed capitalism, or have we taken a revolutionary strength, position of being able to fight and combat, the contradictions that are within capitalism. Because capitalism, within its own framework, it's quite clear that it has entrenched itself within our society. I would say, when we looked into the Soviet Union, when we launched COSAS, I was saying to my comrades, we were clear, there's the Soviet Union and there's the United States. Soviet Union were clear that we were working towards a socialist state. And on the other side, when we're dealing with the Americans, we knew that they are propellers of capitalism. And capitalism being the most violent system and most exploitative system, we have to destroy it. But the collapse of Soviet Union was very costly to our system. It enforced us to go and negotiate and build a reconciliation, which is not class-based. Our negotiations were not based on the dissolution of capitalism. They more and more strengthened capitalism. That's why we seated with a number of problems of how we promised the Freedom Charter to be and what we have not been able to achieve. Because if you look at what COSAS says, COSAS says, before you are a student, you come from a community. And that meant for us at that stage, when we formed COSAS, that we can't go and promote capital's interest. We need to promote the interest of the working class. And that's what guided us throughout the 80s. Now, what we assess today is young people, are you with us in to be able to accept the fact that the negotiation process hadn't produced the dissolution of or the destruction of capitalism, which meant that even if in our agenda fights, a fight against patriarchy hasn't been able to be prioritized, we became more reformist in how we particularly deal with that. We became more reformist in how we wanted to build a non-racial society. That's why we become more conservative and believe that Black men, you've got interest, you must defend yourself. But if you want to assess the Freedom Charter, you're supposed to say to yourself, because if you talk about Buntu, Benturok, and other minorities who were participating, which were building up a non-racial society, it has not been achieved throughout this period. In the 26 years of our democracy, in our own assessment. So you would expect leadership of young people to say to themselves, have we achieved non-racialism? Because you have got access to universities, you interact with white students. You do have, for you to pass, is based on merit. It's not more based on apartheid type of infrastructure. But what is the problem? Why is there no follow-up and being able to assess and say to us, there is a challenge that we are not appealing to white communities or to white students. And what is the problem? I haven't heard that from young people. Because it's very vital if we want to build a non-racial society, which is part of what the Freedom Charter is saying. You should be able to do that assessment amongst yourself, as SASCO and different formations of youth organizations, that what is wrong. You know, when we look at the most important development that I'll talk to, which became quite shocking to our society and shocking to our bones, was the effectiveness of mass mobilization by the GBV last year. That is the first time in history, or as far as I've been reflecting on the fight against patriarchy, led by young women, that we have seen such a bold stance taken by young women against patriarchy, and taken by such young women against violence that is being perpetrated by men. That was very important, because it then says that after assessment, young women have come to realize that it's important that they must reassert themselves and be able to stand up on their own and be able to destroy patriarchy. And that, for me, just needs consistent building, because it meant that we have seen something that in mass mobilization, not just in legislation, coming to parliament and talk to us, but to use your strength in what the Precious Banda Comrade Precious Banda has been talking about, and what the president have been able to allude to, that 500,000 volunteers from the African National Congress went out to go and mobilize people for them to be able to come back with the demands. So mass mobilization cannot be put aside for the sake of legislation. And it is what the JPV, strike, have been able to prove, that with the unity of young people and young women in the manner they mobilized, they kept us very busy for a week trying to work out that how do you deal with this particular development. Yes, it's not anti-status quo, but it does put forward to say, here is it, patriarchy, we are an attack against ourselves, and we are united to destroy you. And that's the type of development you're looking at when we talk about mass mobilization, and when we talk about the Freedom Charter, and when we talk about the progress that has been made to be able to destroy oppression, legacy of colonialism, and exploitation of capitalism. We have been able, as COSAS in the 80s, we called the first Student Stay Away, Student Worker Alliance. We haven't seen that, because in our own ideological position as COSAS, because you see, you can't address society in isolation. You must be very clear that any revolutionary must have an ideological position. And this is what we must always be able to judge our policies based on. That what is our ideological position? We are opposed to capitalism. We are opposed to imperialism. We are opposed to feudalism. And we are opposed to colonialism. And it doesn't need anybody to come to the branch or to come to reflect with the leadership or the senior leadership of the ANC and says, what is wrong with capitalism? Young people must arm themselves and be able to say to themselves that at an ideological position where there's class contradictions, the mission is always standing that history says any Marxist or any revolutionary must be able to take up that responsibility of being able to destroy capitalism. of being able to destroy imperialism, so that you don't get excited about the interaction with Obama, because Obama represents capital. I'll tell you now, within our debates and reflections, and which I miss now, is that it is said to us historically that pandemics in their nature are always a challenge to building of a new social order. But I've been here reflecting on that. And that should be related to how you reflect on the Freedom Charter itself, because it's about health issues. But those health issues are fundamental to how you build a social being. If you look at the statement of the president on his own analysis of how far we've gone with the Freedom Charter, the president says social distancing and the type of health system that we're talking about would be the basis for us to lay down for NHI. So it means that he says at this particular moment in his own assessment that whatever promises we have made within the health system, we should be able to see progress. So that means beyond the pandemic, if we are going to deal with particular development, we'll have to say to ourselves, NHI has to be implemented, because the fundamentals have been laid during the pandemic in the way we've been able to unleash, not the tenders. I'm not interested. I'm interested to hear how many hospitals did we been able to build during this period, and how many young people have volunteered and being able to go into the various places and be able to go and do testing around. Are we going to be able to sustain that type of system? So that it's a lesson that we'll be able to learn. So that when we deal with the Freedom Charter and its progress, we are able to say, link it up to that ideology and link it up to that health system to say, these are the lessons that we are able to do. Because pandemics in their nature don't come and go. They come and remain permanently amongst ourselves. So it's important, if you interrelate your ideas, you look into that environment of the pandemic from an ideological point of view. Don't look it through the Chinese eyes. Don't look at it through the American eyes, but deal with it on the basis that as a revolutionary within the South African context, what does it mean for you to be able to have confronted the issues of the pandemic? If you look at the environment in Cape Town yesterday, at the rain and the lack of social distancing in itself does have an ideological base. It's easy to say that from an American point of view, but it's not easy to say it from where we grew up in our own localities, in our own squatter camps. What do we do? It's where we relate the Freedom Charter and its gains. That what type of housing schemes do we have to be able to alleviate the challenges that we have about social distancing? Now, we have not been able to reflect on that. So it's important for young people to know that they are Marxists. I'm a Marxist-Leninist. I'm not even afraid to say that consistently. This is how I grow, and this is how I've understood. So whenever I look at society and its own contradictions, I put on my Marxist-Leninist cap and be able to look at society and see what type of challenges does society have. I look at the Freedom Charter from a different context. It's not a bourgeois document. This is what you'll hear most of the time is arguments by ultra-leftists. They will say to it, it's a bourgeois document, but I look at it as a different movement where people were being involved and the working class in itself making its own contribution of being able to say what type of economic system should be able to be advanced. And it's how you should be able to look at the Freedom Charter. And it's how you should be able to look at its progress. And the president says young people must be able to debate the economic. Now, I don't hear that debate. And it's a very vital debate because it distinguishes the type of economy that you are looking for into the near future. Because if you don't do that, we'll continue recycling what we're recycling now. That in CAP, where we debated or we didn't debate the economic policies, and tomorrow, when we go to the NGC, there's no improvement on our economic policies because the young minds within the organization have not reflected aggressively on the type of economic policy that is needed. And that is very vital because it means that your future is not just dependent on the type of issues you're raising or rhetoric that you are saying, but it's dependent on being able to tell us that our health system is not moving properly. The assessment that the committee have done on the land issue and what the president have said has to be combined and we make a proper assessment. I was saying to one comrade, I'm going to be talking to them this afternoon, that what is it the rural community have learned during the pandemic? What does a young person who is in a rural area, what do we offer him as young people? We should be able to move away from this situation of saying to ourselves, urban-based type of politics, it's all and done. We should be able to step back and say, is the pandemic in the manner it's unfolding, how much does it impact on the rural communities? Because for us to deal with feudalism, we have to go back to those rural areas and be able to say to those tribal lords, chiefs, you have played your contribution and your destruction is imminent. Because if we come in with a ward system, which is more democratic than the tribal crawls, it means that we're maintaining what the Freedom Charter is saying, the people shall govern. Now, if you do assessments of feudalism, it doesn't work like that. And tribalism and versus chieftain traditionalism are all embedded within the feudal system. Now, I don't hear young people say, and that's why sometimes urban-based fights around GPV are not able to reflect what happens within the rural communities. That's why men that come from the rural areas seem to think that it's accepted that they must bully young women because we haven't been able to phase in or to fuse in the rural politics and the urban politics. So that if we deal with feudalism, if we deal with capitalism, and we have an ideological positions, and we do an assessment of the Freedom Charter, it should be based on that this is an ideological position. There's nothing wrong for a young member of the African National Congress. But we were trained in the ANC. What I say, I call it from the African National Congress. And the illusion of assuming that capitalism in its reformed forms will save society, it hasn't happened. And it will never happen. Capitalism in its nature is exploitative and very brutal. That's why it produces pandemics of this nature. So it has proven itself, and philosophically, that it's a social system that will never be able to do all the ambitions that you're asking from the African National Congress. And for me, who grew up in the African National Congress and who understands how many people, in the 500,000 volunteers, and the 3,000 people that were assembled in Clip Down, nobody says to us the working class was not represented. Nobody says to us the petty bourgeoisie was not present. And nobody says to us business people were not represented. But what it talks about is that an African National Congress that is multi-class. And we should never shrink away from our responsibilities. contestation will always happen. And the value systems that are being adopted by others who have been able to be embedded or being attracted to the interests of capitalism, they are inside the ANC, and they're facing that particular battle of making sure that their own interests are defended. Equally so, that's why we said in our strategy and tactics that we are biased towards the left. And that's how you must do your assessment as young people. Is the African National Congress being biased towards the left with its own policies? We should be able to ask the question that Parliament in itself, in the way it's structured, does it represent the interest of the left itself? Do we see that biasness towards the policies that are generated by Parliament towards the left? Or do we allow capital who have got enough money to lobby parliamentarians to be the one that occupy that center without us? Because the Freedom Charter says the people shall govern. And modernization have created parliament, and that's where that power lies. The political power is with parliament. And we need to be able to ask ourselves as young people, as we do an assessment of that clause of the people shall govern, does parliament carry the interests of the working class? Unshrinkingly, unfearingly, not asking favor from anybody, because it's an ideological position we have taken as young people. And we should not be biased about it. It's not, don't say it in dark corners at night. Say it in the branch of the African National Congress. Say it in the region of the African National Congress. Say it right at the National Executive Committee meeting of the African National Congress, that the biasness towards the left is not consistent. It's quite clear that those that are in favor of capital have been able to win the day, and we should be able to take up that challenge. So that's the type of assessment, Comrade JP, we should be able to judge young people on, and we should be able to encourage them based on their own ideological interpretations, but not on symptoms of capitalism. When you deal with the symptoms of capital, you won't be able to deal with the fundamentals, because life is about not stagnation, but there should be more, there's some mobility and there should be mobility of also of the ideas that young people are sharing with us. And they should never shrink. We never shrink in the African National Congress. As COSAS, when we went into the United Democratic Front, we knew that that politics of front, and we told them quite clearly that some of you have got less interest in the working class. Some of you have got less interest in the armed struggle. But as young people were determined to be able to win the base. And we went into that, into the United Democratic Front, and we reasserted ourselves. That's why the African National, the working class and COSATU thrived within that particular building of the front politics. Because fronts are always there, but they are being contested on the basis of which ideological positions do they take. And African National Congress is just like that in its nature. It's a front organization. And we must contest daily our politics within the African National Congress. Not create some formations outside. No, sit in the branch until late, but be clear that ideologically, this is where we go. When we fought for the autonomy of the ANC Youth League in 1991 at Pietermaritzburg, it's because we're in the same mindset that you are, that young people aren't being treated serious by the ANC. So when we said to the conference, and know of older comrades, even Comrade Chisule and others, we confronted them that it's important that we give the autonomy of the ANC youth. Because that autonomy says we're able to build a vehicle around our own interest. Not an interest determined by my mom and dad, not paternalism, but interest that will be able to carry me forward into my own future in the manner that I've designed it, in the manner that I've seen it, in the manner that I've contributed as a revolutionary. My parents who didn't represent the same interest I represent. So it's important for young people as they do assessment. They look at the ideology, they look at the role of capitalism, they look at the role of feudalism, they look at the role of imperialism, and do your assessment based on that. And that's how you'll be able to see if that's class contradiction between yourselves and capitalism. It's not a healthy one. It has to be destroyed. You can't. It's not a dream, it's science to see how far we can be able to destroy capitalism. It's a responsibility of revolutionaries. It's not something that will be given by somebody else. Have I overdone my time, Comrade JP?
You're raising very important points, Comrade Ami, but yes, I'll let you go a little bit over time.
Okay.
But I think you made the point quite succinct.
Okay, thanks, Comrade JP.
You made the points really quite succinctly. And thank you very much, indeed, comrades. It's also clear that, you know, since last week, we've been given this pressure of making this 2-hour sessions as opposed to the 1.5 hours that we were hoping for.
Okay.
We're trying to be sensitive to data use as well. You know, at this time of the new normal, data has now become the biggest currency, I suppose, for all of us. But having said that, Comrade Ami, really excellent feedback, I think, giving very good structure in terms of a process of application of thought and how we should be able to, especially for our young people, be able to tell where the areas of challenge lies and also the type of things they need to do in taking this, they call it take the bull by the horn type of attitude. So really, I appreciate very much your input. Comrades, I'm going to beg for your indulgence. I had said that we'll finish at 1:30, but if you don't mind, I will start just until at about 10 to 2 o'clock. But we'll appeal to all of you who wants to make a comment or pose a question to please keep it within 60 seconds, 1 minute. So you need to apply yourself a little bit about what it is that you want to state before you do it. That will assist you greatly in sticking to the time. This is not a you spoke, I question you session. It's a dialogue. So you don't have to even ask a question. You can just express a view if you so wish. But at the same time, you could, of course, ask questions if you have any that you want to pose to any of the comrades who spoke. I have Comrade Mvuyisi Matrikama. I'm trying to unmute you, my leader, and you're on the floor.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks. And also thanks to the other comrades who made inputs. They were quite valuable inputs, especially at this time when we are looking at how our young people should really play the role that they should be playing in extricating our society out of the quagmire that it finds itself, initially as a result of the economic realities, and now as a result of the impact of COVID-19. I just want to say maybe something that is more of also of a question, but also an input in the discussion. One of the things that we have seen since the formation of the ANC in 1912 is how important it is for people to be organized in order for them to achieve the objectives that they set for themselves. From the point of view of the young people, there is also a very important objective, that of ensuring that there is an influence that is used in how we get to solutions that should define the future. I then want to check, how do the comrades see the importance of quickly engaging in in the formation of the organization, in the case of the ANC, the Youth League, and the work that it has to do in influencing the path going forward. Because at this point in time, in the absence of the organization that must agitate those interests of young people, you find it very, very difficult to see how that voice of young people can find resonance in the different spaces where we are operating. Thank you, Comrade Jalen.
Thank you, Leader. Comrades, there are few other comments and questions also, both in the chat group and on Facebook. Comrade Tobani Mateza, for example, Tobani Zabalazo Mateza is saying, how can we use our political power to acquire economic power? Is it that we are scared or have no political will to take radical steps in addressing challenges of our nation? One might argue that ANC doesn't need to embark on making new policies. We have good policies. What is lacking is the implementation and monitoring aspects. I mean, those questions same question have come up quite a lot, I think, when we had Comrade Kosazan also on this platform. But I want us to keep it within the theme of today, Comrade, which is around our youth. And if any of our speakers want to speak to it, I'd really like you to bring it down to that question, that if there are problems today raised about lack of implementation, what should become of young people? I mean, there was this call that we need a younger generation, for example, to get into the executive cabinet and be put in strategic positions. And an argument can be made that there's been quite an improvement in that regard. I mean, is it paying off, or is it insufficient, and so on? So there's the question there, comrades. Let me see here. Comrade Vuyo Luchana says that the commodification of our party policies, procedures, and leadership act, which tends to lean towards capitalism, compromise the consistency of development and synergy of our revolutionary progress. Thus, when serious issues confront us, they expose our disconfiguredness as a movement. This most the time becomes the Achilles heel of our revolutionary movement. I'm also now going to take Comrade, there's one hand I saw here, Comrade Lemarco. Comrade Lemarco, I'm just trying to, yes, my leader, you're on the floor.
Thank you, Comrade. No, thank you, Comrade Nyami Boyka. This presentation, it shows that we have a role where we are, where we have to make sure that we inspire young people to understand their role too in the society, so that by the ANC Youth League, we have the preparatory school, which is really relevant to our young people needs. Because most of the time is that it seems that it's only about that high issues that now challenges of the society at large. Unemployment is part of issues affecting young people, issues of health, it affecting young people. So how do we get them right so that we make them to understand that they are the solutions of the future? It's them who must participate, who must understand that they make the government to account, or those who are in public representative positions, so that they to understand that in future, when they occupy those positions, they have to take care of those who are the young ones. So if we can just bring that hope in young people where we are through proper structures of politics, but making them to understand that it's not about them acquiring wealth and all that things, as you see, politics of today. We must make them to understand that they plan for the future, for their children and future generations to come. So if we can win that battles and make sure that we make the government, from local government, provincial government, through its plans, they involve young people in that processes so that they can just put in IDPs issues that they want, though they cannot happen in that way. We make them to be part of the system. They understand how the government operates, so that if there are challenges like issues of coming up and riots and all that things, the young people knows that we have plans in place. We're giving the municipality these issues or the government to deal with. So if we can just inspire them that way, comrades, I think we can go somewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader. Now on Facebook, Karabo Ramaje says that 40% youth representation resolution should be revisited. Assessment must be done with current deployment and its impact in as far as intention of the resolution was concerned. And I'm then going to go to Shabangu Bekifa, who says the foundation of every state is the education of its youth. Come 2021 local elections, hopefully we'll have them despite COVID. But Shabangu Bekifa says, come 2021 local elections, the ANC must have the minimum requirements for any person who wish to be a local councillor. Right? Let me see if maybe there's one more comment or question I can pick up here. Well, Sebastian Lankom says, there are comrades within us who are portraits of the bourgeoisie. How do we deal with them? Quite a loaded question, that one I would say. So I'm going to go back to Comrades Dumiso and Precious. I'm going to go back to yourselves and then go, and then from you, then move over to Comrade Nyami. I mean, there's a number of things that Comrade Nyami also have raised, Comrade. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to comment on those as well, as much as you just take note of some of the issues that comrades are raising here. To be fair to all the comrades, there are a number of comments and also other questions comrades are raising. I can't really go through all of them. I mean, for example, even if I take a comrade like Mzimkulu, Skaram Ntakati Mjadai on Facebook, who says that I agree we need to renew the ANC, but what kind of caliber of youth leadership must be able to propel the revolution forward? That really is the fundamental question of today, by the way, at the end of the day, that I'm really hoping that as you apply yourselves here, you will consistently come back to that very issue, you know, that what is the caliber of the youth leadership that we need that must be able to propel the revolution forward. Zimkulu goes forward to say, secondly, as a center-left organization, the ANC seems to be shifted towards the right. Is such an assertion prematurely? I mean, I think in many ways, Comrade Yami spoke to this very point earlier about the need to be crystal clear about rejecting such a case in point. Now, as I hand over to comrades, we're going to start with Comrade Precious and then come to Comrade Dumi and then round off with Comrade Nyami. I want to add one of two things as well myself, comrades. The one being that, I mean, we do have Youth Month happening every day, Youth Day, and there's a lot of talk in this country that this is done for young people, that is not done for young people, etc., etc. But who actually speaks for young people, in your own views, do you think, today? If we, and accept also that Comrade Dumi correctly says that young people is not a homogeneous group. But if we have to ask what dictates the discourse in the public of what constitutes youth, who really owns this space, and why is that the case, and what can be done around them? Then, I mean, there's a point Comrade Precious was raising about what I want to straightforwardly call the rot that's in the organization. But I want to also turn it around a little bit, Comrade Precious, and say to you, if today there was to be a Zondo commission of the student movement of today and the youth movement, what do you think would emerge from that? And are we having sufficient discussion about possible problems at that level and what needs to happen? Or are we only focused on the fact that, so to speak, the rot is at the top, but we're not able to look at how it might have manifested itself throughout the other levels of the organization. So, Comrade Precious, I want to start with you. Please look at what Comrade Nyami has raised, some of these issues that have come up, and whatever else you may want to add in a space of about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
I'll try my best to respond to
it's a political school, leader, so we're also teaching you to speak within the time, if you don't mind.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. I'll start with yours about the decay in the movement, the youth movement. Currently, the youth movement, all of it is experiencing challenges. Speaking about the Progressive Youth Alliance, we have challenges of factionalism in all of them. So what is happening in the ANC is in fact there in the youth movement. But in our analysis, it happens in the youth movement because young people themselves have agreed to form part of the decay, but two, it's because of the desperation of elders that want to cling on to power and use young people as toy soldiers and foot soldiers for their factional maneuverings. So again, Mina, I usually want to blame more the elders that come and patronize these young people, but at the same time, the young people that accept to be patronized. So if you call a Zondo Commission, probably we'll be there ourselves answering and responding because we are drawn from these youth structures and we formed part. We are not immune to the road that we are seeing. We are part of it. We are part of the decay and the weakening of the fighting capacity of the movement of young people. So it's something that we need to commit to stop. It's something that we need to commit to change if we are serious about the kind of future that we want to build. Capitalism must be confronted in all its forms and shapes and in all ways in which it manifests itself. You know, there's a challenge with men, you know, in the country because they don't want to accept or to see that the struggle against patriarchy is in fact the struggle for socialism, because socialism is about total liberation, it's about equality. And you have those that want to appear, you know, to be revolutionary, to focus more on capitalism and leave patriarchy and sexism as it is. So I was so happy with Comrade Nyami when he touched more on issues, you know, of violence on women and so on. But look at what is happening now, the killings that have taken place during the lockdown, where, you know, we've been speaking, women are speaking, women are calling an end to violence against women and children. But then all of a sudden, you have, you know, which we appreciate, but we are cautious, men standing up to speak. It's also a manifestation of patriarchy. So when we as women say, stop killing us, you don't want to listen. You want to listen to your fellow men. Men must stand up, no priests wearing priest robes and so on, stand and say, yeah, men. So men must only speak to each other, to men. When we speak to them, they don't listen to us. So it's an observation that I've seen, that in a manner in which men are getting involved in raising awareness against gender-based violence, it should not be in a way that entrenches patriarchy on its own and that makes them to own the voices of women. Who owns the space? It's a contested space. That's why we are saying we need to form part of the battle of ideas, where we must go and contest. Young people with the aid of social media, you know, are speaking. Young people are organizing themselves into all these social movements that we see all the time. But what I said even earlier is to say we have an advantage. Most of these ones who organize themselves, it's because they're impatient with the way we do things as a movement. But we have an advantage because we have an organization. You know, they bask in the newness of social movements, but they cannot sustain themselves in a manner we sustain ourselves as an organization. Let's use that to our advantage, but to be able to speak and capture the issues in the same impassioned manner that they raise them. Because we are too careful as young people of the movement. And that's why we suggested that we must build youth fronts, youth popular fronts with progressive organizations to unite us to work together on the things that, that are common, that confront us together as young people. So we must, in closing, Chair, we must define the future that we want. If you look at the evolution of the movement, young people define their own future, all along from the formation of the ANC to all epochs of struggle until today. Young people have always defined their own future, and young people have always been in the forefront, including in June 16, it was young people. So today's young people must take responsibility and must stand up to condemn all these things that are there and, delaying transformation, delaying the development that we want, delaying us in attaining, the goals of the national democratic revolution. In short, let's seize the moment, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Precious. Comrade Dumi.
Thanks, Comrade JP. Comrade JP, I'll start by responding to the question that says what type of youth. In the conclusion of the presentation, I say that this youth, which will drive us to the society we envisage, must be a youth that is formally and informally willing to learn, such that they expand the knowledge base of the ANC and improve its technical capabilities in order to deliver successfully and implement complex aspirations of the Freedom Charter, like running nationalized mines and a state-owned bank. So in a nutshell, I'm saying we want young people who are students of Lenin, who learn from the masses, but also who have got the technical know-how of running complex institutions like ESCOM, mines, banks, and so on and so on. So these are young people who live amongst the people, but also go to school. The second point, which I find extremely interesting, Comrade Chair, it's unfortunate that we're out of time. It's Comrade Nyambi's interpretation of the Freedom Charter. It is a very radical interpretation, which I'm more aligned to, but it is the interpretation which has been lacking in the ANC. Comrade Nyambi is clear that our aim must be to smash capitalism. But the ANC has not been interpreting the Freedom Charter like that. In fact, in 1955, there was a document which was circulated in the ANC which said, does the Freedom Charter mean socialism? And the conclusion was that no, it doesn't. Similar to that, when you go and listen to Mandela, when he's in the dock, explaining the relationship of the ANC and the Communist Party, he dwells into the meaning or attempts to interpret the Freedom Charter. And his conclusion is that the Charter is not a socialist document. So, Comrade Nyambe, I think we must continue to theorize about this matter of the Freedom Charter and what it means. You would know that part of a very thorny issue was the interpretation of the Youth League between the period 2008 to 2013 and the ANC, up until a point that the ANC issued a document or crafted a document which they called SIMS, Strategic Interventions in the Mineral Sector. And that document was giving a different interpretation of the charter than that of the Youth League. The second matter, Comrade Nyambe, I fully agree with you. We need to do an honest assessment on how far we have gone in implementing the demands of the Freedom Charter and see where are the real problems. And this is accompanied by an assessment of what Comrade JP raised, the issue of deploying young people. It's a very important thing. It ought to happen. The ANC in Kabwe puts it very well. But when we assess, has it worked? Has it delivered the results? Is the significant or marginal improvement sufficient? We must say, where are the problems? And I can tell you from the top of my head, because we did not theorize, we did not put in sufficient mechanisms on the type of young people we deployed, you will find that at the core of the problem, we deployed young people which were not fit for purpose. Young people who were in fact a representative of the backward and old thinking of the old guard. So that is an assessment which we must go through. Comrade Nyambi, absolutely correct. I agree with you. The importance of ideology and theory in our struggle. Very important matter. In fact, last week, Comrade Charles Nakula makes this point. He says that, unfortunately, in the movement, in the recent past, there's emerged a group of people who are very antagonistic towards theory and history of our movement, and a youth which is impatient, which is hostile to experience. So we need to balance that. We have not been theorizing sufficiently, and as a result, we have lost the hegemony we once had. The ANC was able to run this country through radio freedom. That is because we had what Gramsci called hegemony. And we no longer have that. And as a result, and one of the things why we no longer have that, we no longer theorize about our problems. Comrade Precious Panda makes a very important point on narrow nationalism that is emerging within the ranks of the ANC, of the movement in general and the ANC in particular. We need to be very vigilant. Comrade Sisulu, when he explains, when he writes an article about Abo Potlako Libalo and Boso Bukwe, after they have left, he explains our nationalism and how is it progressive and how we are not an organization that wants to replace white minority rule with black rule or African rule. We wanted the people to govern. So I agree with Comrade Precious that we ought to be vigilant, but most importantly, Comrade Precious is making a very important point. This narrow nationalism, or what we are seeing that is coming up even in the world, what others call Trumpism, is informed by pressing socio-economic conditions which are not being attended to, and our people are becoming disgruntled and starting to lose faith in the project of building a national democratic society. And as a result, they are looking for people they must pound on. Last matter, what is the perspective of young people, Comrade JP? Well, very clear. If you read the 2011 Congress resolution, we describe the type of economy we want. We have 7 cardinal pillars, which we say these are the cardinal pillars which will take us forward. And I must say, which I mentioned in the presentation, that the disruption, the dissolution of the leadership of the Youth League in 2013 dealt a serious blow to the Youth League as an organized formation, but most importantly to the perspectives they stood for. It introduced levels of fears which we have never seen in the movement. Just to make a point, in the 2015 conference, there was so much fear such that words like nationalization, expropriation of land without compensation, you would swear that somebody said that they must be banned. And that's not how young people must do their things. So what type of a society are we envisaging, even post-COVID? It is the society which we define through the 7 cardinal pillars. Most importantly, expropriation of land without compensation, nationalizing of mines in the commanding heights of the economy, building state capacity such that we reduce outsourcing, free education and all those things. So I think that is the society we want as young people, or not so young people. And lastly, I think as part of the discussions, Comrade Nyambi, and I think will help us on this, I think we must also reopen the discussion of defining youth. From where I am standing, it is no longer sufficient to define a young person between the age of 14 and 35. The conditions which led the first generation or the Youth Commission Act to define youth as 14 and 35 have changed drastically. We cannot continue to say that, because the truth of the matter, people in their late 20s, early 30s, no longer have the same experience as young people. In fact, their experiences of paying bonds, of running families, are more aligned to the families of older people. So I think we must open the discussion on the definition, in particular, the age definition of youth. Thanks, Comrade JP.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Jimmy. Comrade, you'll have to forgive me, but I'm going to have to be a bit restrictive on 5 minutes. But you are our last speaker now. Comrade, I hope we haven't lost you now. I don't. Comrade, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm saying you are giving the last. You are the last speaker. 5 minutes, please, Leah. Unless if you feel you are covered. It doesn't look like you can hear us properly. Can you hear us?
Who's the speaker? Okay. As I said, Comrade Chair, I appreciate how comrades are looking at it, but I'm listening to the comrade now. You know, capitalism has imposed on us a deeper crisis on the economic policies that we face. Nowhere around the world are the markets performing very good. Job loss is a bloodbath. That's what the president says. And we need to be able to be more radical as young people, that what type of an economic policy is going to be able to bring back jobs, fight poverty, unemployment. If we don't have that reflection, if we don't redebate the role of the Reserve Bank, of who, because the president says in his own presentation that the foreign investment that he wanted to rely on doesn't show, because all foreign investments right across the world are reviewing their positions, given what they've been confronted with. So do we have the natural resources that we always talk about, gold and the energy, to be able to bring up a sustainable economy? We haven't been able to exhibit that. And to only say that we'll do Black empowerment in a reformed way, it's not being realistic to being able to say the economy is not performing. We can't continue developing business people who are going to front for other people. Young people must think more dramatically, more revolutionary, that how are they going to assist to turn around the economy? How are you going to help young people in the rural areas to be able to rebuild the economy? The agricultural performance is very bad, but one thing that the pandemic has been able to prove is that so that you walk away from food parcels, you'll be able to encourage young people back in the rural areas to participate in the agriculture and be able to, the farms that the state is continuously giving to them, monitor that those farms are being able to produce what they are supposed to be producing, than only taking the money away from the state and disappear after that. Those are the issues that are going to confront us. And we need young minds to be able to reflect on these particular ones, so that you are able to know that the future is yours. I've been very clear when I entered the revolution. I always tell people every day, I volunteered. My mom didn't ask me or my dad to participate. I got influenced by the material conditions that were surrounding me. And young people must be realistic even now, that if they don't address the material conditions that surrounds them, their future looks dim. We can give them as much positions to go to parliament, but at the end of the day, what is it that they're going to do with those positions? That should be the question. So what mostly is important is what type of society and what type of programs have we been able to put together to go and achieve within the responsibilities that were being given. Let's not demand to be a municipality manager and you don't perform. That is very bad for young people. That's why people are skeptical. But young people themselves must be able to fight against that. I will say it now in my last word, that we earned, nobody gave us, we earned the title that says Raw Young Lions Raw, because we're in the battlefront. Tambo had to acknowledge the work that we're doing on the ground without controversies. And those young people are still alive till today, because they made it their own responsibility of being able to transform society. They informed themselves ideologically. We battled against people whom assumed that within our role, with how we look at, the Freedom Charter is not a bourgeois document. We understood it and we interpreted it so that it became a revolutionary document. And it became our school of thought. Everywhere we go, we say, you adopt the Freedom Charter, and then you walk along within the Congress movement. Thank you, Comrade JB.
All right, Nyami, thank you really very much for making the time today. I know that we had to, come to you also within this week to say, no, this is the challenge before us. Can you rise to the occasion? And I can confidently say to you that I think your inputs has really been very valuable. In fact, they also point to other points of discussions that we need to have in future and seek to develop those into further political education and engagement. So really a great sense of gratitude for myself. Equally also to Comrade Ndumi, Comrade Ndumiso, Mukako, and also Comrade Precious Banda. There is a comment somewhere here, I don't know who made it on Facebook, who says that, I mean, we have true leadership. We are not lost, just listening to our young people making their own inputs, Comrade Ndumi and Precious. I must say that you certainly have seemed to be inspiring other comrades out there who are very much thrilled by the inputs you've made. So thank you very much also from my side and on behalf of OR Tambo School that you could make the time. Now, as we draw to the end of today's session, comrades, I just want to also bring one or two things to your attention. One is that I hope that all of you have been able to enroll for the OR Tambo School's online courses. And if you have enrolled for it, that you are able to encourage others within your branch and everywhere where you engage with comrades to please encourage them to go to the school's website. You go to the section that says courses, and then there is the one that says prerequisite courses. We do encourage you to complete those courses. As we speak right now, the view that's increasingly being canvassed is one that says that at the minimum, to occupy position of leadership in the ANC, you need to have completed those very courses. So I would encourage you at this point in time to really make the time to enroll for those and complete it, and also encourage other comrades to do the same. Tomorrow we will issue the latest edition of UMRABULO journal, themed economic transformation. So that will be circulated via email, also be put on the school's website, so you can download it from there if you want. The next edition will be themed social compacting, with the deadline of submission of articles being 30 July. You are very welcome to contact me directly if you are keen to make a submission. Articles must be 2,000 words long and not exceed 3,000. So, I'm a WhatsApp away or just an email away if you so wish to engage. Last but not least, next week we'll be hosting Comrade Jesse Duarte. And for me, it's now quite clear that this 1.5 hour is not working. So we'll probably just have to make it 2 hours from 12 to 2 and accept that, there's not much we can do about that. So next week, we're hosting Comrade Jesse, who I think will also be picking up from some of the points you are making today. She'll be talking in particular around this matter about non-racialism, how we build that type of society. And one would assume would also be reflecting on some of these populist tendencies that we've been having doing the rounds in our country and even around the world. On that note, comrades, thank you all very much for joining us today. Until next week again, Sunday, 12 p.m. Matla.
Thank you, Comrade JB.